Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025, and our friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let me start with one of the most fundamental and basic questions when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. I don't know if the Russian president talked about it during the meeting that he had with Donald Trump, which is the case of sending more weapons to Ukraine. Here is what Donald Trump said.
They didn't pay the 2 and they paid the 5. So, and as you know, we are selling a tremendous amount of equipment to NATO. We're not spending any money, we're making money, but I don't want to talk about making. I want to talk about we're no longer involved with funding Ukraine, but we are involved with trying to stop the war and the killing in Ukraine. So we're selling missiles and military equipment, millions and millions, and ultimately billions of dollars to the NATO people, where I'm very friendly and we have a great relationship. But that was an amazing trip. So they're funding the entire war. We're not funding anything. I think it's an important point to make because a lot of people don't understand that.
I don't see Europe needing any sort of weapon. They're not fighting anything. He knows these weapons are going to Ukraine if they get these weapons, Europeans. And he confessed that he's concerned about his concerns of what's going on in terms of casualties. How is that possible that you send more weapons and you are at the same time concerned of what's going on there?
Nima, you're going to go gray trying to imagine rational thinking with Donald Trump's Ukraine policy. It's impossible. It's a mission impossible. Donald Trump, this isn't about national security policy. This isn't about foreign policy. This is about domestic policy. Donald Trump is trying to appease a domestic audience and several domestic audiences at the same time. He has his base who says they're tired of American money being sent off to fund Ukraine. And then he has his political opposition, or what I would say the traitors among us, those who claim to be supportive of Donald Trump, but who actually vehemently oppose any policy that would bring an end to this conflict on terms acceptable to the Russian Federation. And so he has to go through, these very complicated machinations. He doesn't care about the dead because he doesn't know how to count the dead. He just repeats numbers that are given to him by people. If he cared about the dead, then he truly wanted to know what the reality is and understand why reality matters. He lives in a fantasy land where Russia's losing more manpower than Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are losing manpower at a sustainable rate, meaning that Ukraine has the potential of continuing this conflict. Russia, according to his numbers, is not able to sustain this. Therefore, the concept of continuing this war to put pressure on Russia seems to make sense to him. But the fact of the matter is we now know that 1.7 million Ukrainians are dead or missing. I think there's a couple 100,000 of those who could be missing, but they're probably dead. That number is going to go up because according to the same leaked data out of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, 625,000 of those dead/missing are this year alone. That's 90,000 a month. And that number is going up higher because Russia's just dominating. So this means that every month, another 90, soon to be 100,000 Ukrainians are dying or disappearing. Those are big numbers. If Trump cared about Ukraine, he'd say we have to bring this war to an end because those numbers are only going to get worse. Russia's numbers are big, but not that big. Right now it's estimated that, Russia's losing, one dead for every 10, 13, 15 Ukrainian dead. So, the Russian numbers are far less than the Ukrainian numbers. Still big numbers. I mean, I'm not saying Russia's having a cakewalk here. This is hard fighting. This is some of the most high intense combat that's been seen since the Second World War. At least Donald Trump gets that aspect of it right. And he's starting to understand that it's a new kind of war. He spoke the other day about drone warfare and the reality of drone warfare. But, He can't allow himself to be painted into a corner, meaning that he caved into Russia. So he has to say stupid things and do stupid things. This is why the other day he posted on social media about Ukraine needed to have the ability to attack Russia. Nobody ever won a war on the defense. You have to have the ability to attack. He coupled that then with an announcement that the United States, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal, was going to sell 3,000 some odd extended range, attack missiles, or I don't know what the A stands for, to Ukraine. And on the surface of it, you say, well, what? Because wasn't it Donald Trump who realized back in December of 2024 that the Biden administration's green lighting of use of ATACMS missiles for targeting the Russian strategic debt brought us to the brink of nuclear war? Trump recognized that. Then that's why he said, I won't continue that policy. Now he's doing that policy, just using a different weapon system. But let's parse this out, because that's what he said. He's posturing right now so that nobody can say, you're not supporting Ukraine. He said, no. We're just not paying for it. But NATO is paying for it. Remember those 10 Patriot batteries that they were going to provide? The full complement. I mean, I love that term, the full complement. It's so wholesome. It makes you feel really good and safe and secure. And now I guess we're providing with the full complement of ERAM missiles too. But those Patriot batteries will never be delivered to Ukraine. First of all, they have to be produced. You have to get in line. There's a lot of people looking for Patriot batteries and Patriot missiles. Israel used a whole bunch of them, needs replacements. The United States doesn't have any left. We need to beef up our forces. So once we start producing them and we get them to Europe so they can transfer them to Ukraine, we're talking 2027, 2028. There won't be a Ukraine by then. It's not going to last much longer. The ERAM, it was a system conceived in 2023. It didn't exist. In fact, it doesn't exist. I mean, they've spent 2 years developing it. I think it might have passed its last trial, but it's not in serial production yet. That means that if you're building it, you're building one-ofs for testing purposes. They're not designed to be given to Ukraine yet. And yet in 6 weeks, Donald Trump says he'll begin delivery. That means that let's assume, to make that announcement, the system now has passed its final evaluation. The maximum output that the United States will have with everything going full speed is 1,000 missiles a year. That means that to get to what Donald Trump is, we're talking at least 3.5 years down the road before that full complement gets there. But some missiles may be delivered, a handful, a dozen, starting. But then there's the fine print. Ukraine can't use these missiles without America's permission. Only America gets to designate the targets. And if you think Donald Trump is going to allow the United States to designate targets for the ERAM missiles, knowing that in doing so, you close the door on any peace possibility because you become a direct participant in the war, that isn't going to happen. Everything gets pushed off 6 months. I think Donald Trump is hoping that in 6 months there will be a new reality on the ground, one that compels the Ukrainians to accept the Russian terms without compromise that can bring this war to an end. Otherwise, this war will continue until Russia accomplishes all of its objectives. And unfortunately, to get those objectives, Russia will be called upon to destroy the Ukrainian army. There's 800,000 of them in there today. I think Russia, by the time this is finished, will end up killing another 250, 300,000 Ukrainians. That's just the way this cookie crumbles. That's the way war goes. So, this is the reality. Donald Trump is saying things, but the reality is nothing of substance is going to be delivered. Donald Trump has bigger fish in mind. He has a strategic nuclear treaty he's trying to revive with the Russians. He's trying to come up with, profitable joint enterprises, joint exploration of the Arctic. I think it was Chevron just basically was greenlit to go back into the Russian oil business. Trump said, yeah, we're friendly to that. That's, billions of dollars. And after Chevron will come other American energy giants that'll get back into the Russian market. This is what Donald Trump cares about. He doesn't care about Ukraine. In fact, today, or I think yesterday, he said, what did Ukraine expect going to war with Russia? They got their butts kicked. He recognizes that reality. it's just a political game that's being played right now because there's a tremendous amount of opposition inside the United States, in Europe, and colluding between Europe and the United States to prevent Donald Trump from having better relations with Russia. And unfortunately, these people who oppose better relations with Russia are willing to sacrifice Ukraine to achieve, their outcome. And when I say sacrifice, I mean literally sacrifice Ukraine. They're destroying the genetic pool of Ukraine. Soon they'll be sending 18-year-olds to the front line, and when they do that, that's it. Ukraine's finished as a race because you'll have a bunch of women and you won't have any men left, and that's it.
You said the decision on the part of Ukrainians, but who's going to decide about that? Is that all about Ukraine, or you're talking about Europeans and the establishment in the United States?
Well, I mean, the Europeans and the establishment in the United States believe they're going to be the ones making a decision, but they're not. The only person making the decision is Russia. Russia's in complete control of this narrative here. Russia's not budging. Russia offers cosmetic compromises, but also Russia understands that even the cosmetic compromises they're putting on the table, Ukraine won't accept. And so now Russia, look at Steve Witkoff in the White House, yesterday with the assembled cabinet, saying, Russia has made concessions. Russia's ready to concede. Russia's ready to work with us. Ukraine's not. But he views that as a positive because the Russians are making concessions. So, at the end of the day, it's not going to be the Russians that are going to be called upon to make dramatic. It's going to be the Ukrainians who will be called upon to accept unconditional surrender. And right now, Zelensky is incapable of agreeing to this, which means this conflict will continue. Every day this goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse for the Ukrainians. There's no good news coming out of Ukraine. None.
And unfortunately, I don't know if you saw the interview with Scott Bessent talking about the frozen Russian assets. And he said Europeans can use them as a leverage on Russia. Here is what he said, Scott.
$1 billion that is Russian assets sitting in European banks right now. I know it's frozen, and the EU has said that they'll use the interest on that money to rebuild Ukraine. But shouldn't all of that money go toward rebuilding Ukraine to ensure that Putin doesn't get his hands on that money anymore?
On the frozen Russian assets, I think that's all part of the negotiation with President Putin. So I don't think we should seize them immediately.
I see.
And it is a chip on the table during this big negotiating process, and we will see whether part of that goes to the Ukraine rebuild.
Okay.
How do you see this big negotiating table that he's talking about? What is the big? Is it all about Ukraine, or you think that he's talking about something bigger than that?
Oh no! If he's talking about the potential seizure of Russia's sovereign wealth that was illegally frozen by the West, and they've been illegally skimming off the interest. We're talking about a very small table called Ukraine. Russia's not going to play this game. I mean, this Scott Bessent has to understand that Putin's just not going to play that game. So whatever you think you're going to have with Russia ain't going to happen if you seize their money. Sorry, Scott, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And Europe recognizes that. You just saw, I think the head of the Belgian government say, we're not seizing their money. We can't, because once that happens, begins this catastrophic chain reaction that ends with the destruction of the Western financial system. And Scott Bessent knows that. He's just playing stupid games. Again, he's one of the guys that stabs Trump in the back, because this is not the kind of advice that's conducive to an outcome that's positive. This is the kind of Scott Bessent is a Russophobic guy who thinks in Cold War mentality. He's not a problem solver. He's not trying to help solve this problem. He's like Marco Rubio, sitting there pretending to be sitting next to Donald Trump and helping Donald Trump, but stabbing Trump in the back when it comes to achieving better relations between the United States and Russia. The notion that Russia's sovereign wealth can be stolen and not create insurmountable problems with Russia is just absurd in the extreme. The good news is the world knows this. The bad news is it creates confusion where there shouldn't be confusion, because we should be talking about the big table. The big table is where we can be talking about strategic arms reduction. We can talk about Arctic, joint Arctic exploration, exploitation. We can talk about the return of the energy giants to Russia. We can talk about investments, lifting of sanctions, normalization of relations, all the good things. But you're not going to get to that big table as long as the United States is holding hostage hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian sovereign wealth.
Do you think that they talk about it, these things, but they're not publicly announcing it?
Well, they can't take the money. I mean, Besson doesn't even know how he would begin to do that. It's against the law. It's against everything. And when you're talking about banks and financial institutions, this stuff sort of matters because a lot of it's based upon confidence. The quickest way to lose confidence in the dollar, lose confidence in the Western banking system, is to start seizing sovereign wealth assets. Then nobody will want to deposit their money in Western banks. And that's the end of it. And for countries like Belgium, Luxembourg, and others who have part of their economy is dependent upon banking, it'd be the end of them. So I have to say, there's a couple people when they open their mouths, I listen, but I don't overreact. Keith Kellogg, who cares? Scott Bessent, who cares? Lindsey Graham, who really cares? No, but I mean, there's a number of them when they speak, you're just like, it doesn't matter because they're so far removed from reality that their opinion no longer matters.
Russia, Scott, you've been to Russia and you saw what's going on there, the mindset of these people there. Do you think that they really care about how sensitive does Russia feel about America, the United States sending weapons to Ukraine? I want to know that because in the meeting Putin had with Donald Trump, I don't know if they talk about these things, the intelligence and the weapons that the United States is trying to provide. They may talk about NATO, but it's all about Ukraine. It's not about NATO.
Look, Sergei Lavrov and other Russian diplomats have said it straight up. They know what's going on. They know the United States continues to provide weapons. They know the United States continues to provide intelligence. They understand this. It's just the reality that they're in right now. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change, what's going on the battlefield isn't impacted by this. It's just a reality. But the Russians have said that there can't be a lasting peace with Ukraine so long as the United States provides intelligence, weapons, etc. That in order to get the peace that Donald Trump claims he wants, the United States will have to stop doing all the things they're doing now. But Russia's been dealing with this for over 3 years now, and they're winning. So from the Russian perspective, they'll just deal with it a little bit longer. Now, that's the Russian government. They're very pragmatic. I'll tell you, the Russian people are furious because our weapons are killing Russian soldiers. Every day there's a mom, a wife, a daughter, a sister who's lost a loved one, and they're being killed by American provided weaponry. And the Russians have a hard time squaring the notion that the United States is trying to pursue peace at the same time providing Ukraine with the resources that enable them to kill Russian soldiers. That doesn't mean Russia's going to quit. Just means there's a lot of bitterness now in the hearts of the Russians. And they don't necessarily buy into the notion that Donald Trump is a good guy. Look, the Russians want peace. They made that point over and over again. But they also said it's peace through victory, meaning that you can't have peace without victory. Victory comes first, then peace. And that's the mindset of the Russian people right now. They want this war to come to an end, but they're not willing to make the concessions that would deny them the victory that's been earned by the blood of the Russian soldiers who've been killed by the American weapons.
Lavrov said that they didn't talk about the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky during the talks. And what it was when you look at the United States and the Trump administration, somehow Donald Trump came out saying, "So we're done with the talks with Vladimir Putin. Next time we're going to have Zelensky uh, talking to Vladimir Putin. They may invite me if they want me to be there. I would be there." And so when they didn't talk about it, how you can offer that in the aftermath of that meeting?
Well, let's put it this way. Donald Trump came into that meeting with a certain list of expectations. They didn't talk about any of those. They talked about the ones Russia wanted to talk about. But that list still exists. That list still influences, Trump's, policy options. And so it's the equivalent of me saying, "Okay, Nima, we're going to meet. And when I meet, we're going to be talking about things. You're going to be meeting with, I'm going to make you meet with McGregor. You're going to meet with him face to face. You and McGregor are going to meet. That's going to happen. And we're going to do this, that, and the other thing." And then you and I get together, and I don't mention McGregor at all. You don't mention McGregor. We don't mention anything. But when the meeting's done, I go, "Yeah, I had a good meeting with Nima. And, I think the next time he's going to be meeting with McGregor. And we're going to, that's because it was on my piece of paper. It was on my agenda. I didn't talk about it. It's still on my agenda. I'm still going to talk about it. But you're going to sit there and go, "We didn't talk about McGregor. It didn't come out of my lips." That's what's happening here. Trump wants a meeting with Zelensky, wants Putin to meet with Zelensky. The Russians are like, no. I mean, I guess we could say in theory, but we can't have an agreement with him. He's not a legitimate president. And that really gets under the skin of Trump. You saw that the other day in that thing, bullshit. They're going to accept it, no matter, excuse my language, but, the president said it. Why can't I? But yeah, he just lives in a fantasy world. This is where he really needs high quality people around him. I'm not saying that I have all the solutions, but I am working with a group of people that we call the Poughkeepsie Peace Initiative, and we're putting together what we call a civilian engagement team. And we're offering our services to the president because we're saying, "You're getting the world's worst advice about Russia. Please give us an audience. At least listen to us. Bring in your team, your team A, and we'll bring in team B. And we'll call it the Super Bowl of ideas. And I can bet you at the end of the day, team B trounces team A because your team A has no clue what they're doing. And you're the president who claims he wants peace." I mean, this is how bad it gets. He's just getting horrible advice from people who have an agenda that isn't the president's agenda. And I wish he could see this. He was blind to John Bolton and Mike Pompeo when they sabotaged his efforts to bring about the denuclearization of North Korea. And today, I think he's blind about, Marco Rubio. He's blind about Scott Bessent. He's blind about Keith Kellogg. These people don't want peace with Russia. It's the last thing they want. They're going to sit there and say all the nice things behind it, but then they're going to turn around and they're going to be pushing, these fundamentally flawed narratives, these fact-free narratives. The president deserves better, especially if we, the people, want him to succeed. So we'll see. I don't know if we'll get an audience. I don't know, what's going to happen, but I can damn sure tell you we're going to try because, as you yourself have pointed out, the inconsistencies of the president's policy approach is manifest. It'll drive you insane trying to figure it out.
What I see in the United States that these people are somehow managed to buy time for their agenda, for the agenda of establishment in Ukraine. They did that before during the Russia Gate, but they have managed somehow to come out with some sort of, it's not that much strong in the media, but they have managed Donald Trump so far the way that they want him to be. And it's not just go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. They're and they did it that first term. Russiagate tied his hands like you wouldn't believe. Guess what? Russiagate's over, man. Not only is it over, it's becoming a criminal offense. People are being arrested. People will be arrested. People are being charged. The people that embrace that narrative are out of power and soon to be out of society. I don't know if I fully endorse this. I'm not a fan of politicized witch hunts, But the point is, the Russophobes have been neutralized. Two, there was no conflict the first term. There's a conflict now. What are you buying time for if you're the Europeans? For Ukraine to get their asses kicked? Okay, Russia's ready to play that game. As I told you, the casualties are unsustainable. 90,000 a month, soon to go up to 100,000 a month for Ukraine. A month. Can't sustain that. So what are you buying time for? It's not as though there's a rainbow, you're going to hit a pot of gold here. No, it's a disaster. It's just a bridge collapsed in a cliff and you're going down into hell. That's the ride they're on. So all they're doing is killing more Ukrainians. And they don't care about that, but they're also bankrupting Europe. I mean, come on, Nima, you're smarter than I am. I know it. That's why I come on your show, because I learn a hell of a lot more from your questions than anybody learns from my answers. You know what's going on in Germany right now. You know the state of their economy. You know the French government's about to collapse, literally. I mean, it may not last the month, and the month's almost over. And, when the French government collapses, Europe's already said the next government will, when Macron goes, he may go, they said it'll be the Putinists. The Putinists will be in, Marie Le Pen and all that. Well, there's the end of France. And guess what else is going to happen? AfD is the most popular political party in Germany today, and I think the lady who runs it came out and said, "Yeah, when we win, we're out of the EU. We're done. Finished. Goodbye. Sayonara." That's the end of Europe. If France and Germany drop out of the EU, Europe doesn't exist anymore. Unified Europe. It's finished. It's gone. And then you'll see a fracturing like you've never seen before. So what are you buying time for? People have to understand, the more time you buy, the more you sustain this absolutely insane failed process that's captured Europe since the beginning of 2022, the more you guarantee an outcome which is very good for Russia and very bad for Europe. And it's not good for the United States. I mean, we need stability. I mean, I'm an American who doesn't believe in the European Union. I really don't. I think it was a failed experiment from the get-go. But I'm also an American that says it's in our best interests. You know that I'm sympathetic to the Russian point of view. I believe history's on the right side of Russia. But I ask the Russians this all the time. Is it in your interest to see Europe collapse? Is it in your interest to see NATO fail? And the Russians are like, no, we sort of like stability. We don't want Europe to go away. We don't want NATO to go away. We just want them to leave us alone. Maybe learn to live in peace and harmony. The last thing Russia wants is chaos in Europe. That's not good for Russia. Chaos is bad. And yet this is what the people who are opposing a Russian victory and dragging out this war in Ukraine by playing the delay game with Donald Trump, they're just guaranteeing a really, really bad outcome for Europe, a really bad outcome. The end of the EU, the end of NATO. And this is the scary part because we don't know what's going to happen, but we have some hints. The whole idea of the European Union was to make sure that there were no more, large-scale ground wars in Europe anymore. Well, they failed. We got one going on in Ukraine right now. But you do know that within the NATO alliance, Mark Ritter, it's the strongest alliance. It's never been stronger. I mean, my God, it is so strong. I'm so impressed. We can bench press more than the mayoral candidate of New York City. But that's not saying much since he can only bench press 135 pounds assisted by. So anyways, let's take that out of the way. The point is, within NATO right now, in the center of Europe, you have two mini NATOs showing up. Got one mini NATO that is, I think it's Kosovo, Croatia, and Albania. I think Croatia and Albania have that NATO membership thing going for them. But Kosovo doesn't. It's not a NATO state. So they've created a military alliance, a security framework that's outside of NATO with two NATO members. In opposition to them, we get Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia, not a NATO member. And they've created an alternative, an opposing military bloc. So when Europe falls apart, and it will, we're going to see wars in Europe. We're going to see wars that are going to be horrific, wars that are going to rival what's going on in Ukraine in terms of death and destruction. Europe's condemning itself to another 100 years of conflict. And the conflict won't be limited to these marginal states. We got Poland right now making some harsh rhetoric against the Banderists. And, if you listen to Naryshkin, the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, one of Russia's objectives might be to rid itself of the Banderist cancer by somehow having Western Ukraine fall under Polish control. There will be a purging like you haven't seen. There will be a retribution. It will be ugly. But if Poland regains its eastern territories, what are the Germans going to say about Silesia and Pomerania and East Prussia, which they had to give to Poland to compensate for the land that was taken by the Soviet Union? You think the Germans are going to sit there idly and go, yeah, that's all right? No. So now we're looking at, a German-Polish war? Who's going to side with the Poles? The Balts? Who's going to side with the Germans? I don't know. Maybe France, maybe not. Maybe France won't. So now you got a war against France and Germany, although I find that unlikely, but that could happen. The British, they're everywhere causing trouble. They've signed an agreement with Poland. They've extended their nuclear umbrella to Poland. So now if the Germans and the Poles start to get a fight over Silesia and Pomerania and East Prussia, where is the UK going to come in? And if the UK jumps in, France sort of extended theirs too. So now Germany's going to turn around and say, well, we need nukes, either develop themselves or, hey, Russia, we'd like to talk a little bit. See, this thing, Europe will, what we conceive Europe of being, won't be anymore. It's over unless they stop this insanity right now. Stop it right now. I'm not saying the EU deserves to exist. What I'm saying is Europe doesn't, for the betterment of mankind, Europe doesn't need to slip into chaos and anarchy. It's already got so many problems. The immigration problem. If Germany was invaded today, 16% of the male population said they'd be willing to give their lives in defense of Germany. That's if Germany was invaded, 16%. What happens if Germany follows through on its promise to go to Ukraine? What percentage of the German manhood is going to say, yeah, we're ready to go die in Ukraine? None. Nobody in Europe wants to die in Ukraine. And yet NATO and Europe are crucifying themselves on that cross. Anyways, that's the Russians don't want that. The Russians don't want that kind of instability. Russia likes predictability. Russia likes to know what's going to happen. It's easier to formulate policy that way. It's easier to allocate resources if you have a good idea of what the future is going to be. So the idea that Russia's gloating over the collapse of Europe and the collapse of NATO is just an absurd notion. Russia prefers stability. Russia prefers predictability. And right now we have nothing but instability and unpredictability. My English language is horrible. I apologize. Too many syllables.
Yeah, Scott, when it comes to NATO, I think the crucial point about NATO is that NATO is not a defensive force, is an offensive force. This is the problem with the strategy of these endless wars that NATO is pursuing. This is the problem when it comes to Russia, and right at the border of Russia, you come in so close to Russia, at doorstep of Russia. How you can imagine Russia would not react to you? And on the other hand, I don't see if the United States decides to keep NATO as a defensive force, nobody would have any sort of problem with NATO. Nobody would attack Germany. What's in it for Russia to attack Germany? What do they want from Germany? Russia wants a better relationship, with economic ties with Germany. They don't want war with Germany. This is what Russia is fighting for, in my opinion.
Look, now we get into sort of a sensitive topic, but Russia has a demographic problem. You see Russia passing laws right now to encourage childbirth amongst the Russian people because they have a declining population. And because of the conflict in Ukraine and because of the expansion of NATO, Russia's had to increase the size of its military. Now it's up to 1.3. It's probably going to get up closer to 1.6 by the time the expansion is done. 1.6 million under arms. And this takes people out of the workforce. So you see Russia now, talking about, hey, can we bring in Indians? Can we bring in, outsiders into our workforce? The Russians would love nothing more than to have NATO just say, we're a defensive organization again. We're back to our roots, and we will, behave accordingly. I think you'd see Russia start dropping the size of its military quickly, because then it can take that manpower and put it back into the workforce. The workforce then that will be well paid. What happens when you have a well paid workforce? They get married. Give a guy some money, he finds himself a pretty girl, and next thing you know, he has a house and some kids. And that's what the Russians need. They have these great family values, but it's hard to raise a family if you're in the military. That's not the best place in the world to raise a family. Maybe as an officer, a senior officer, but if you're an enlisted man, if you're out there in the ranks, no, it's disruptive as hell. And the Russians are moving away from a conscript system to a contract system. So we're talking about long-term, contracts. We call them enlistments here in the United States. But again, you're going to be in the business of preparing for war, training for war. You're not home raising a family. You're not producing anything. So anybody who sits there and says, no, the Russians want to really build up their military and really do it, they don't understand Russia. It's not what Russia wants at all. It's the exact opposite of Russia wants. Russia will do what Russia needs to do to protect itself. There's no doubt about that. But the Russians would prefer that rather than expanding their military by 600,000, to have those 600,000 in the workforce and have that workforce gainfully employed, making things that are good for Russia and good for Russia's economic partners, earning a good solid income, paying taxes, and then getting married and raising kids, lots of kids, because the Russian needs kids. This whole war thing, this whole war footing, it's not good for the health of a nation, the economic health, but also the demographic health. Europe's going to see that problem. You see declining birth rates everywhere. This is sort of the danger of immigration, because now you're injecting non-traditional values into, societies that are defined by traditional values. It dilutes the unique character of nations. Russia has spent 25 years rebuilding what it means to be a Russian. There was a time when Russians were ready to abandon Russia. They were abandoning Russia. They didn't believe in Russia. They had lost faith in Russia. Not today. I have to say, I'm deeply impressed with the Russians. They're not a perfect society. Nothing is. Nothing's perfect. But they're pretty damn good. These are people that are, by and large, happy with who they are, happy where they are. Could things be better? Sure. Are they working to make it better? Yeah. But the Russians like being Russian. They're proud of being Russia, and they have a lot to be proud of. I think Russia would like the Europeans to be proud of being who they are too. The Russians don't, hold it against me for being proud American. Some scratch their head and say, well, what are you proud of? And I say, well, the potential. I think America has more potential than any place in the world because we're not trapped by our history. We live in a prison of ideas. And if we could just live up to those ideas and those ideals, we could be pretty damn cool. But we're not doing that. So yeah, but I love the potential of America. And the Russians are like, cool. Love a guy who loves his country. The Russians love a person who loves their country. They will never hold it against you for saying, I'm a proud American, or I'm a proud Iranian, or I'm a proud Brazilian, or I'm a proud Canadian. They're like, good. You're proud of your country. So are we. And therefore, we have a lot in common. You love your country. I love my country. Let's get along. The Russians are great about this. Europe, not so much anymore. And it's sad. It's sad. I lived in Europe. I grew up in Europe. I grew up in Germany. And I traveled extensively. Back in the 80s, I got the Eurail pass, and you throw a backpack on the back and you just go. And for 2 months, I just basically caught trains and camped out and saw all of Europe. and you could drive places. My parents, every time they took a vacation, we'd go to a different place in Europe. It's just fantastic. I loved Europe. I loved every aspect of Europe. I loved crossing the border. I loved going from Germany, where I had my German marks, and I had to go into Italy and get the Italian lira. And then, one of the first things you do to get the train station is you go in and you exchange your money and you get the other money. And now you're like in Italy. And I really know I'm in Italy because I have lira. Not today. It's all euro. And they've sort of erased the borders. And I know it's supposed to be convenient, but Europe's lost its allure, lost what it means to be European. Anyways, I babbled on too far about that.
Do you feel that, let's put it this way, can the former Austro-Hungarian states, together with Serbia, realistically form a counter coalition to resist NATO's forever war strategy? Is that possible?
If Europe was healthy and NATO was healthy, it would be almost impossible for that to happen. But when we start talking about collapse, and we are going to see collapse, anything's possible. And what will happen is that Europe will break up into different factions. And you just identified one, which is the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's amazing how people forget their history. And thank you very much for bringing this up. Thank you for bringing this up, because for instance, in Turkey, people are all talking about Turkey, and I'm like, you guys do know that it was just a little bit more than 100 years ago that there was a caliphate in Turkey, the Sultan. The Ottoman Empire was there. When we talk about Syria, we're literally saying 100 years ago it was the Ottoman Empire. Turkey, Iraq, the whole thing. And people are just like, nah, 100 years isn't that long ago. I mean, we're talking about, 1925. If I talk about American history, oh yeah, the flappers, the Roaring '20s. My grandparents were alive in the Roaring '20s. Okay, so you realize there's direct connectivity, but somehow when we apply it to the other part of the world, it's like, no. Why you mentioned Austro-Hungarian Empire? Because it existed. It was real. And we're talking about people's grandparents or great-grandparents. People are alive today who know people who were alive during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There's a direct connectivity of historical transfer of emotions and knowledge and information. And so it's not gone. And so when people are when they look at the failure of the European state today, and people are going to be looking for alternatives, you can be damn sure that there will be people who say, hey, the core of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we should come back together and work with one another to be allies. Yeah, you can definitely see that. And that's what we sort of see with Serbia, Hungary, and Slovakia. That's sort of that's like a core, the Slavic core of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Not total Slav. The Hungarians aren't Slavs, but it's a core that they have common values, common history, and they definitely have opponents in Europe, the Croatians, the Kosovars, the Albanians, and who knows? Maybe Austria will join their ranks. You never know. Once Europe starts to fall apart, anything's possible. Sky's the limit.
Scott, do you feel that the Trump administration somehow is trying to normalize the extreme violence and genocide in Gaza?
I don't know if they're trying to normalize it. I think they're ignoring it because they know it exists. They've facilitated this. Look, Donald Trump. I gotta when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. When I'm wrong, I'm wrong. When Donald Trump came out and said, depopulation of Gaza and all, I talked with you about it. I said, he can't really mean that. This has to be a ploy. And then, of course, when there was a counter offer on there, I went, he put an offer. He didn't really want it to happen. There's a counter offer out there. Turns out he wanted it to happen. Turns out he wanted it to happen. This is Donald Trump's policy, what's happening today. The slaughter of the people of Gaza, the genocide. We have to use that word. People don't like to use that word. They get insulted. No, use the word because it literally fits the definition. Look it up. Article 2 of the Geneva Conventions defines what genocide is. I forget what the American law is, Section 1081 or 1089 of 18 U.S. Code. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But, we define it. We know what genocide is. Hell, we could just use our own precedent, because the United States, they go, well, it doesn't meet the category of genocide. What were the standards for the ISIS genocide against the Yazidi? The exact same standards that exist today in Gaza, except Gaza's by an order of magnitude greater. The inconsistency of America is crazy. But inconsistency is one thing. Criminality is another thing. We are literally war criminals here. They when the whole world is debating the issue of genocide and stuff, international lawyers were and other concerned people were quick to say genocide's bad. But there's worse things than genocide. War crimes and massive human rights violations can operate on a scope and scale that far exceed the harm being done by genocide. Genocide has specific legal terms that have to be met to get that term there. But there's bad things that can happen too. And however you cut Gaza, it's a war crime. It's a massive human rights violation, and I believe it readily fits the definition of genocide as put forward by both the Geneva Conventions and U.S. law, and by U.S. precedent. The standard we ourselves have set for defining genocide is easily surpassed in Gaza. So, gosh, here we are. On the one hand, I'm trying to say I'd like to create a civilian engagement team to work with Donald Trump to promote good relations between the United States and Russia. And I do. But on the other hand, I have to recognize that Donald Trump is one of the greatest war criminals the world has ever seen, because he not only is facilitating Israeli war crimes, he's an architect of these war crimes. They are implementing his plan, his strategy. He's guilty. If there were ever a Gazan Nuremberg trial equivalent and there was a court of jurisdiction and Donald Trump could be brought before it, he'd be found guilty and hung by the neck until dead. And so would a whole bunch of other Americans, because what we're doing is unforgivable. And for the American people, I've sat there and you've heard me say it, scratch a German, get a Nazi. I don't forgive the Germans for what they did in World War II, and I never will. I'm just that way. I can live in peace with them as long as they recognize who they are and what they were, and make sure that they guard against ever going back down that path, which they're not doing right now. But my God, what are we, the people of the United States of America? We have embraced Zionism. And Zionism is the modern day equivalent of Nazi ideology. It's literally about imposing genocidal policies on a people, the eradication of the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, of the Palestinian state, this targeted eradication, the wholesale slaughter. I mean, what's going on in Gaza City right now is the equivalent of what the Nazis did to the Warsaw Ghetto, and yet nobody wants to acknowledge those parallels. Oh, how dare you? Blood libel. No. I'm actually being nice. If I say, oh, all you've done is the Warsaw Ghetto, I'm being nice, because what you're doing is worse than the Warsaw Ghetto. And the American people are complicit in this. And every American has to look in the mirror and say, I am a war criminal. I am the equivalent of the good German. I'm the person that sat by and let this happen. I'm the person that walked the streets and had the ash come on my shoulder and I brushed it away and pretended it didn't happen. I knew what was going on down the road there, but I just closed my eyes to it. My neighbors who, used to do this, that, and the other thing disappeared. And then I watched people come in and steal their property and I said nothing. We're standing by while the United States is facilitating the mass murder of Palestinians. Truth is now a death sentence. journalists telling the truth in Gaza now are being killed because the last thing Israel wants is the truth to be told. You have Benjamin Netanyahu coming out just admitting that they're losing the narrative. Therefore, Israel must find a better way to alter the algorithms and to do this. No, and to kill journalists. Any journalist that there stands up and says, you are committing genocide, gets killed. If I went to Gaza, they would kill me in a heartbeat, instantly. Anybody who goes to Gaza it's a death sentence. So that's where we are right now. I mean, we can't sugarcoat it. We can't pretend it's not there. How do we chew gum and walk at the same time? And what I mean by that is, I struggle with this every day because people hit me all the time. They say, Scott, why aren't you focused more on Gaza? So I'm trying to stop a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. I'd like to think that that's sort of like a big deal. And that's where my skill set is, about 70 to 80% of my skill set is there. Yeah, I got a lot of experience in the Middle East, a whole bunch of experience in the Middle East. And I've got a lot of experience in Israel. I'm learning about Palestine. It never was my cause, but my God, it's become my cause today. But when I look at what I can bring to the table, I'm more efficient dealing with the Russia question than I am the Gaza question. But man, it's hard. Man, it's hard because it's just there. Mass murder done in my name, my taxpayer dollars. And then I sort of feel guilty because I'm so focused on trying to prevent a nuclear war with Russia that I don't spend the time that I should on what's going on in Gaza. And I have to admit, I'm tired of looking at the pictures. I'm tired of looking at the pictures. It breaks my heart to see, these dead children, these dead mothers, these dead civilians, people just trying to live, starving to death, mass starvation. What the? How can that happen today? How can that happen today? Today, in this day of mass information, where it's there right in front of your eyes. It's not like you're reading a newspaper about the starvation of the Indians in World War II, reading a story that's 3 months old. No, it's happening right now. And what are we doing? What are we doing? Ah, man, I'm going to go crazy. This is the kind of stuff that just drains your soul. But we got to soldier on. That's the whole thing. You can't win every battle. You got to win the ones you got to fight the ones you can win. And right now I'm dedicated to the Russia thing, and I'm not getting off the Russia thing, but it breaks my heart. It drains my soul because every morning there they are. Dead children, dead parents, dead civilians, and the Israelis just gloating over them. And we're backing the Israelis, and we somehow pretend that this is normal. We pretend that Israel is a normal functioning state. It's not. It's a cancer to the world. It's a cancer to the soul of humanity. I'm not advocating the annihilation of the Jewish race. No, this has nothing to do with religion, although increasingly it does, because what's happening is the Israelis are using, religious themes. Amalek. Have we forgotten this? The repeated invocation of Amalek, the creation of a subhuman, identity for the Palestinian people that justifies their annihilation in the name of the Jewish faith. We can't forget this. Do we know that there's battalions of Talmudic scholars specifically recruited into units who are going in there and carrying out these horrific crimes? They believe that they're permitted by God to rape Palestinians to death, and they do so. They have no qualms about killing women and children because they believe God wills it. There is a religious aspect to this, and this is where I condemn American Jewry. I'm sick and tired of walking down my street saying we stand with Israel. That means you stand for genocide. You stand for mass murder. We stand for Israel means we support murder. That's it. You can't support Israel. You can't stand with Israel and not realize that you're supporting murder. In the American Jewish community, they deserve all to go to hell. Now, I know there's a handful of them out there doing this, that, and the other thing. Maybe more than a handful. I'll give them credit. But collectively, the big Jewish organizations, if you stand with Israel, you stand with the devil. That's just, there's no other way to put it about it. You're on the side of Satan. Don't tell me you're on the side of good. Don't tell me you're God's chosen people. You are literally doing the devil's work, because that's what genocide is. And I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this, and I don't want to get your channel banned on YouTube for my emotional outburst. So sorry about that.
I think the last targets when you go and fight something like the way that Israel is killing people is attacking hospitals and journalists, because this is the last thing that you would attack. 'Cause these people, they don't do anything to you, fighting you, and they don't do anything. They're literally doing nothing but helping the people who are damaged, who are suffering, and the lives that here is what is Israel has attacked a hospital in Gaza, and then the journalists went there to see what has happened, and they attack again and killed the journalists. And here is what the Israeli government and spokesman said. Scott.
Noble profession. But many journalists who have reported from Gaza, so-called journalists, are simply terrorists with a press vest on.
His British accent is somehow amazing to hear that, and the way that he's trying to say his point of view. And here is what we've seen in the media, Scott. Many people may wonder, what is this? This is the UK spy plane just gathering information on July 28th and hand it over to Israelis to attack people in Gaza.
Yep.
And at the same time, they're trying to say that we condemn what's going on in Gaza. I think the British, I think what's going on with the British government, the mindset, their strategy, the sort of manipulation in the Middle East is unbelievable. Any case, I'm not ignoring the case of Ukraine. I put the case of Ukraine in the same scenario. It's all about the British and the way that they're thinking of these things that are happening.
Yeah, look, it's the British trying to hold on to relevance. It's the British stepping into a leadership vacuum by the United States. You know, we used to be able to control the British because we worked very closely with them and we subordinated them to our will. But now that we've created opportunities for gaps to appear in the relationship, the British have stepped up to that. There is no moral look, as bad as the United States is, and we're pretty damn bad, there are, believe it or not, moral barriers. There's things that, we say, no, enough's enough. For the British, there's no such thing as enough is enough. The British are the worst nation in the world when it comes to this sort of thing. They truly can embrace policies that cause the deaths of hundreds of thousands of millions, and they won't even blink an eye. That's just who they are. Their intelligence services have no soul at all. The CIA has done horrible things. I'm not going to pretend they haven't, but I will say at the end of the day, there's a reason why CIA officers all end up alcoholics, because at the end of the day, they know what they've done is evil, and they're ashamed of what they've done. The British, there's no shame there. They all go out and get their knighthood, and they sit there and they retire, and they have their little posh parties, and they all chuckle and chortle and laugh over the stuff they've done, the crimes they've done in the name of, Her Majesty or His Majesty the King. So no, the British, they're out there playing games of empire right now. That's what they're doing. They're trying to manipulate behind the scenes. They're everywhere. Everywhere you find death and destruction, you find a British hand.
Before wrapping up this session, I want to play a clip in which it's a tragedy, in my opinion, but here is what's going on in the mind of the President of the United States.
Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, Hamas, we're having meetings all this week on all three of those conflicts, and we hope to settle them before the end of this year. Your team is nothing short of incredible. And there's only one thing I wish for, that Noble Committee finally gets its act together and realizes that you are the single finest candidate since the this Nobel Award was ever talked about to receive that reward. Beyond your success is game-changing out in the world today. And I hope everybody one day wakes up and realizes that.
It seems somehow we are living in different time and universe.
I mean, it's shameful, first of all, for a president that is supposed to be make America great again, to be pursuing this narcissistic, egotistical goal of having some award issued by a Norwegian, group of elitists, award that has lost its meaning, become so politicized down the road. I mean, they gave it to Barack Obama for doing nothing. And they sit back and they don't look at the people who actually promote peace. They just hand it out for political reasons.
Actually, it wasn't for nothing. It was for bombing Yemen. Or bombing Libya. Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, they gave it to him before he bombed Libya, though.
Not before.
Yeah. He should have turned it in after he bombed Libya. He should have said, "I haven't lived up to the values that are put in here." But at least he got it for the potential. Trump. What war has he stopped? What war has he stopped? India, Pakistan, he didn't stop that. They stopped it. Cambodia, Thailand, still some tension there. He didn't stop it. They say he just sticks his nose into everything. Says, there, I touched it, I stopped it. Armenia and Azerbaijan, man, that could actually, the Zangezur corridor could actually turn into a major war because of his meddling. He didn't solve any problems there. He's not. Here I am. See, I'm trying to get a meeting with this guy, and I want to, say, hey, I'm here to help you on Russia. So I have to. It's time I start behaving a little bit more politically and diplomatically. But he's not smart enough to know any of the nuances of these details. The reason why we're trying to engage with him on Russia is that he's advised by complete imbeciles. I mean, with all due respect to Steve Witkoff, he doesn't know a damn thing about Russia. He has good relationships with Kirill Dmitriev, but it's a relationship that's only brought about by the fact that Trump, has sent him and Vladimir Putin has empowered Kirill, so they have this relationship. But you just listen to Witkoff; he doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. Nothing. Keith Kellogg is 100% a Ukrainian shill. Hell, they just gave him a medal for being such a good Ukrainian shill. That's all right, Keith. Good job. But at least admit what you are. Don't pretend to be some sort of unbiased envoy looking for peace. You're solidly on the side of Ukraine. That's why you got a medal. Marco Rubio is just a warmongering hawk who hates Russia. Just go back and he's never said a nice thing about Russia in his entire life. Hates them, hates communists, hates the Russians, the whole works. Pete Hegseth isn't smart enough to, lead a box of bricks, let alone the Department of Defense, apparently the Department of War soon to be. These are the people that advise Scott Bessent. We've already talked about this, the imbecilical approach he has towards this Russia issue. There's no peace coming out of any of these policies with Russia. This is why we're trying to put together this civilian engagement team. I may be excluded because if I were Donald Trump, I wouldn't let me anywhere near the White House after what I've said. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize. It's the truth, and it has to be said. But he's supposed to be America first. Why is it that he puts so much credence into this bauble from a Norwegian group of elitists? It tells you he's not America first. He's Donald Trump first. This is make Trump great. That's it. That's the movement. And no, that's not good for America. If he really wanted peace, he could solve the Russia problem today. Just pick up the phone and tell Zelensky it's over. Call up the Europeans and say, nope, we're done. We're not playing stupid games anymore. But he won't. Instead, he'll facilitate the continuation of this conflict with the promise of American weapons. This thing will go on for more months. Look, we're talking 90 to 100,000 dead Ukrainians a month. Okay, we got September, October, November, December. That's 4. I'm telling you right now, that's 400,000 dead Ukrainians by the end of the year, in addition to what's going on. That's in addition to 625. That's more than 1 million dead Ukrainians this year. If the conflict goes over into next year, the death rate's going to go up even higher. So you're going to talk by June, if this war goes on for another year, another 1.5 million. So 2 million more dead Ukrainians. That's what Donald Trump's giving. You want to give him the Nobel Prize for that? Are you crazy? And then we get into Gaza. What he's done in Gaza alone is disqualified, finished. It's like giving Adolf Hitler a Nobel Prize because he evacuated troops from, some corner of the world. No, but you committed the Holocaust. You invaded the Soviet Union. You allowed the Commissar order. You carried out mass crimes. We can't forget that. Donald Trump is the total package. And right now the total package is indelibly corrupted by what's going on in Israel. There's no forgiving this, and there's no redeeming this. Yes, we can try and prevent a nuclear war with Russia, and we must. But that doesn't absolve Donald Trump of the crimes that he's committed with Israel at all. And the fact that he doesn't see that, and the fact that he thinks this is a selling point, just shows two things. One, that he truly is a narcissist blinded by his own egomania, and he's an irrational player at this point in time. And two, the American people are truly the dumbest people on the planet, because we're buying into this, because we're nodding our heads and saying, oh yeah. I mean, his base, come on guys, do better. Really. You say you believe in American values, but yeah, I mean, now we're going to get, now we're going down a different path, but flag burning. I love the flag. I got one above me. That flag flew in Vodkinsk. That's why I have it there. That's the flag that flew over the Vodkinsk headquarters while I was in Vodkinsk. And I love it. I love the American flag. Former, Marine officer, officer of the day. I had to read the flag manual, know the laws, know how to treat the flag, how to handle the flag, how to raise the flag, how to lower the flag, how to fold the flag, all the things. It's the living emblem of our country, the living emblem of our country. I didn't say that. That's the flag law. And yet I will defend somebody's right to burn this living symbol of America because the Supreme Court has deemed that to be constitutionally protected free speech. And I love my country so much that I'll stand by with tears in my eyes as you burn my flag and say, you have a right to do that. I disagree with you. I resent you, but you have a right to do that. But no, not in Donald Trump's America. We have a Third Amendment that prohibits the quartering of soldiers in people's homes, which means that it's reflective of the notion that we don't want to live in a militarized society. Yet Donald Trump now is sending troops into the major cities of America to fight crime. But as Benjamin Franklin said, if you're willing to sacrifice liberty for security, then you deserve neither. And that's where we are today. And the cities he's sending them to aren't necessarily, you have to be suspicious because they're also the heart of the political opposition. So he's literally sending American troops to occupy cities where the greatest opposition to Donald Trump exists. We live in a dictatorship. I mean, the constitutional republic's on the verge of being destroyed by this man who claims to be all about making America great again. But the only thing that makes America great is the Constitution. We are a constitutional republic, not a Trump dictatorship. Yet this is the direction we're headed down. I may get the FBI to visit me again because of this, but so be it. There are things we're dying for. And one of those is the Constitution of the United States of America and what it means to be an American. And today, sadly, the American people are adrift. My wife, when she came here, had to take a test to become an American citizen, a test on civics, on the Constitution. And the passing grade is 100%. You're not allowed to get any wrong. I will tell you right now, if every American citizen took that test today, natural-born American, I dare say over 95% would fail. We don't know what it means to be an American. We've lost touch with who we are, what we are. And this is why we get these policies that we have. Because real Americans would never support what's going on in Israel. Real Americans who believe in human rights, who believe in the dignity of mankind. All men are created equal. You ever thought about that? So anyways, that's where we are. Sorry about it, man.
Yeah.
Tough topics.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always, talking to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a great week.
Great. Bye-bye.